Imot Guananape. I'm Darren Blaney, Chief of Pomako First Nations.
I'm Samoyed Tlek. I'm Chief Harry Nice from the Nisga'a Nation, Northwestern BC.
And to begin, Bob Chamberlain will begin.
Okay.
There you go, Bob.
There you are. Good morning, everyone. Apologies for not being able to be there in person. I want to welcome you all to the First Nation Wild Salmon Alliance press conference concerning the open net pen fish farm 2029 ban that the government has announced. We have Chief Darren Blaney, Chief Harry Nice online. We also have Chief Marilyn Slett, who is Secretary Treasurer with the Union of BC Indian Chiefs, and Cookby Willie Sellers of Williams Lake First Nation. And what we want to be able to demonstrate to all of you today is the support of First Nations from across British Columbia for the implementation of the announced fish farm ban in BC oceans by 2029. We have steadfastly stood with the federal government. We've worked with them to implement their stated goals. And to date, we have identified 130 First Nations that support the ban. And the support is to ensure wholesome protection of the sacred species of wild salmon that we are so fortunate to have in British Columbia, that have been in such a dire state for at minimum 1 or 2 generations. And at this point, we need to be able to have fulsome protection, focus on rebuilding wild salmon. And we have written a letter to Prime Minister Mark Carney seeking a meeting to discuss how we can advance the rebuilding of wild salmon in British Columbia as a nation-building project, one that would advance reconciliation, one that would ensure food security for First Nations across the province, would have fulsome environmental benefit in every watershed that has salmon, but also meet the needs of all British Columbians and Canadians that rely on wild salmon, and to fuel the massive economy that is Pacific wild salmon. And the Wild Salmon Alliance over the years has developed a broad network of support, bringing together groups which quite honestly don't normally work together, where we've had First Nations, we've had commercial fishermen, sport fishermen, wilderness tourism operators, all standing with a united voice to protect wild salmon. And I would love to say that we've had a response to our letter to Prime Minister Carney, but we have not yet. And we certainly do want to continue to support this government's transition plan and the stated ban of fish farms in BC oceans by 2029. But I would like now to turn to Chief Marilyn Slett and ask her to provide a few remarks. Thank you.
Gayaksika, Bob, and Gayaksika to all of the leadership that are in person in Ottawa and online. I'm Chief Marilyn Slett. I'm calling in from Ilsik Territory on the central coast of British Columbia, and also the gateway of the Great Bear Rainforest. I'm here today on behalf of the Union of BC Indian Chiefs in solidarity with the First Nations Leadership Council and the First Nation Wild Salmon Alliance. First Nations across British Columbia are united in calling on the federal government to fully implement the commitment to ban open net pen fish farms by 2029. The federal government made clear a commitment to transition away from open net pen fish farms by 2029, and that commitment must be honored. Continued delay or silence from Canada is deeply concerning and undermines trust. If the government fails to implement the 2029 ban, there will be significant pushback from First Nations across British Columbia. This position is grounded in multiple resolutions passed by the Union of BC Indian Chiefs, the First Nations Summit, and the First Nations across British Columbia, included with the BC Assembly of First Nations. These resolutions reflect consistent and unwavering direction from our chiefs to protect wild salmon. At a time when relationships with government have been strained, First Nations leadership remains unified on this issue. First Nations have called on Canada for a full transition away from open net pen aquaculture. First Nations have also clearly rejected the so-called semi-open or semi-closed systems because they continue to pose risks to wild salmon and marine ecosystems. These interim technologies do not meet the precautionary standard required by First Nations. The courts have confirmed that the federal government has the authority to act using the precautionary principle. The Discovery Islands decision and the federal court's affirmation of that decision support taking action where there is risk and scientific uncertainty. The law supports moving forward with the 2029 ban. The science continues to show risk to wild salmon from open net pen fish farms. There is no credible basis for the delay in the transition. Decisions must be grounded in independent science, Indigenous knowledge, and the precautionary principle. First Nations are putting forward a clear and constructive path forward. Land-based closed containment systems must provide a way to protect wild salmon while creating economic opportunities. This approach is unifying opportunities across British Columbia and Canada. Canada must confirm and implement the 2029 ban. These are some of the immediate federal actions that we are calling on the federal government to take. Canada must immediately release the What We Heard report from the previous transition planning process. Canada must restart transition planning in a transparent, First Nations-led way. Canada must ensure meaningful consultation on aquaculture regulations and closed containment definitions. And in closing, rebuilding wild salmon is a nation-building project that supports food security, culture, and economic opportunity. When we protect wild salmon, we are protecting something that benefits all people in British Columbia. The path forward is clear, and the question is now whether Canada will follow through. One of the things that Bob had mentioned in his opening is wild salmon connects all of us, as coastal communities, Indigenous communities, communities that rely upon a healthy ocean for our food sustenance, and wild salmon is deeply embedded into who we are as Indigenous people. We have songs and ceremony and stories with respect to salmon. It is something that has sustained us since time immemorial. As a Hilsic person, we carbon date our people back 14,000 years, and wild salmon has been a staple and cornerstone of our diet and our way of life. And that is why we're here today to continue to push forward to protect wild salmon. It benefits not just our communities, but society. And thank you, Bob, for allowing me some time here today. Gayaksika.
Gayaksika, Chief Slett, thank you for your comments. And you mentioned the judicial review in Discovery Islands. So I'd like to request that Chief Darren Blaney offer a few remarks, as the Discovery Islands are within his First Nations traditional territories. Chief Blaney.
Thank you, Bob. I'm the chief of Homalco First Nations, and that that is in our language Homalku. Homalku is people of the rapids between Discovery Islands and into the mainland. And I think the issue that was there when the fish farms were in before the judicial review, we have all kinds of clam gardens that are about 4,000 years, and some are older because they're underwater. Lots of the impacts from the fish farms were affecting not only the salmon, the fry that are coming out of the inlet, but the cod stocks and also the clams that were there in the clam gardens. And for us, it's very important to have that connection to the land. When the fish farms start to sterilize the land, they're basically taking away our opportunity to access the land, the connection to the land, and the culture and the resources within our territory. So I think it's important that the farms transition to land. I think the opportunity for any other judicial review is done because of there's no national interest that can be provided that would bring this up to a higher court. So it's done now on that part. So I think the important part of what we need to do now is look at a transition plan, and that is going to a land-based system. And I think when we do that, we kind of find common interest with those that are supporters of the farms to move them on land. We can all work together on that. I think there's an opportunity for that, and I think it's up to Canada to help to move that along as well. I think the work that we're doing here is to support the ban in 2029 and move on to a transition plan, because I think you can't keep kicking the ball down the road. Imot, thank you.
Thank you, Chief Laney. If I could ask our Chief Harry Nice from the Nisga'a government to offer a few comments on the Nisga'a's perspective on fish farms and the work that you're doing internationally. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. And I'm a next nism Scotland dogs. Algonquin ni one of good morning to you all. My respects and thanks to the Algonquin tribes for allowing us to be on their territory this fine morning. I'm Chief Harry Nice. I'm the Director of Fish and Wildlife for the Nisga'a government. We're the first modern-day treaty in British Columbia. And part of the negotiations that was done by leadership of our nation was fish, a very important part. And our fish, historically, as Chief Laney has mentioned, it says, and others have mentioned, we have names for the fish. The sockeye is misa in our language. The dog salmon is spring salmon. Millet is steelhead in our language. So that very, very much tells us that the historic nature of our river system that we have. The Nass River that we now manage with Fisheries and Oceans is the third largest river, salmon-producing river in British Columbia. We respect the attempts for commercialization, but we support the fisheries, First Nations Fisheries Salmon Alliance quest to have the ban in place by 2029. We respect that, and also, as Chief Binley said, the transition is there. The transition is there for partnerships for on land base. And the other point to be made is that our people are the staple. It's a main staple of our people continuously, year after year. We just finished an Ulican fishery on the Nass. That's the first fish that arrive on our territory. That harvest is just finished. Now we're waiting for the wild salmon to come in the next month or so, and then we carry on with our season. So in support of the efforts to keep the ban in place, and we ask the government to maintain that and support that. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Nice. Turning to Cook B. Willie Sellers of Williams Lake First Nation.
Chuki New Flat this went when Cook B. Willie Sellers, Hello, and thank you for the land acknowledgement from Chief Nice. I want to also acknowledge Chief Blaney and Chief Slett, and of course Bob, and giving us this opportunity to speak on something that means so much to the health and wellness of our communities across the province. Really, one thing that we're seeing today is a unified front, a broad First Nation support for the ban by 2029 of open fish farms. Located in the interior British Columbia, we have two major runs that run through our territory that support the South. We have the Fraser River Run that spawns in horsefly that also supports the early Stewart Run. We have the Chilcotin Run that spawns in the tributaries of the Chilcotin River. Fishing is, of course, a big part of our annual harvest. It is something that we rely on quite heavily. And over the years, we have been massively impacted for other reasons, whether it was floods, whether it was fires, whether it's the Big Bar Slide, or whether it was the Chilcotin Slide. And to put added pressure on with the open pen fish farms, it puts a lot of stress and anxiety, and there are a lot of triggers that happen in our community, not being able to have the opportunity to harvest sockeye salmon. I wrote a children's book back in 2014. It's called Dip Knitting with Dad, and it was a children's book that I felt like I know. It's about something that I know best. It's about something that brings me a ton of joy, that has brought a ton of joy to me as a young child, as a young man, as a young father, and of course, as a chief of my community. One thing that we really notice when the fish are running and we have the opportunity to harvest them, the community is happier, the community is healthier, the mental health of our community is especially happier. And having the conversation about the commercial side and making sure we're finding the balance on the stewardship side is a big part of why we're all here today. We want to be able to actively harvest these salmon every single year, and over the years, because of the impacts that continue to happen on these runs, there has been a handful of years that we haven't been able to harvest them. On those years that we aren't able to harvest them, we're trucking fish in from other communities, whether it's in the Nass system in the north or from our neighbors in the south. It's not sustainable to do that, of course. It doesn't allow us to get out onto the river and to get out onto the land. What we want to do is eliminate all those impacts to the best of our ability by working together in unity, so that our future generations are going to have the same opportunity that I had, the same opportunity that my dad had, my grandpa, and so on and so forth. When you come into our community on a successful harvest year, we have everyone from our elders teaching the youth to our I guess my age generation, teaching the youth. The dry racks are full, the smokehouses are full, the freezers are full, and when it comes to wintertime, we are being able to celebrate those fish, whether it's sockeye, whether it's spring, whether it's pink salmon, whether it's coho, whether it's steelhead, on a weekly basis. Now, that is a luxury, and that is a privilege, is what we've learned over the years, because of the impacts that continue to not give us the opportunity to harvest them. So, I mean, you can imagine we are very passionate about this conversation, and to see unity across the board, across the province when it comes to the fish. This is a positive thing, and we want to get to a place where we're able to celebrate those salmon every single year, where we're able to gather in a good way every single year. Open pen fish farming isn't allowing us to do that, and is one of those impacts that is potentially devastating to those salmon runs. So I appreciate the time to speak. Good morning, everyone. Bob, as always, thank you for your passion, and thank you for being such a strong advocate for us here in the interior and through the province of British Columbia. I'm Mike Selton on my relations.
Stem Cookby Sellers. So if I can offer just a very brief summary, I believe that we've very carefully represented the entirety of British Columbia here from the First Nations perspective, where we have our chief of the Nisga'a people from the Nass River, Nass Valley, Chief Marilyn Slett from Central Coast of the Haitso, Chief Blaney from Coastal First Nations in and around Discovery Islands, and Cookby Willie Sellers from Williams Lake, well up into the Fraser River. And we're having some technical problems for Chief Michelle Edwards from the Statlium to join us here this morning. But the invitation that I wish to extend on behalf of the Wild Salmon Alliance and the member First Nations that work so tirelessly to protect wild salmon. And I would invite Prime Minister Carney to come and visit any one of our First Nation members' communities when we're working on fish, so he could fulsomely understand what it means to our people for food security, what it means for unity and healing for our communities across the province. And to be able to see an investment by Canada in a nation-building project for Pacific wild salmon would help their government attain certain commitments they've made in terms of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, to rebuild the opportunity for the exercise of our traditions and culture. And we definitely would welcome a meeting with Prime Minister Carney to have further discussions and work with the government to develop the path for the fulsome protection of wild salmon, for the fulsome rebuilding of salmon across British Columbia, not only for First Nations needs. This is the critical part that we are doing. It is for all British Columbians. It is for all the watersheds' environmental benefit. It's going to be very helpful in terms of the economy. And when I think of the challenges that Canada is facing in terms of international trade and the seeking of new partnerships and strengthening partnerships internationally, I don't want to see our government lose sight of the protection of Section 35(1) Aboriginal rights here in Canada and the commitments made through UNDA, and to embrace the fulsome support that First Nations are stepping forward to work with the government. And so we really want to ensure that the government keeps its commitment for the 2029 ban of open net pen fish farms in British Columbia. And to have such broad support is critical. And the First Nation Leadership Council has many resolutions over the years calling for the protection of wild salmon from open net pen fish farms. There is unwavering support for the government on this topic, and we really wish to continue to work with the government to see a successful completion of the open net pen transition planning process and the rejection of semi-open fish farms as part of that transition. It does nothing in terms of protecting wild salmon from disease and pathogen. And the ban was announced as part based upon protecting wild salmon. So at this point, I'd like to turn it over to any questions. And for the press that's in the room, if you have a specific question for a leader, please identify that when you ask your question. Thank you.
So jump in. Yeah, so this is, I guess, I'll leave this open to anyone who has comments, but you guys are at the disadvantage. You have to do your press conference before the salmon farming press conference later in the afternoon, but I want to just bounce off what I imagine they'll say. You guys are saying that this is nation building and to improve the environment, that they're probably going to come with from their side that that the fish farm is nation building. I think they're going to be leaning heavy on that foreign investment, as you just mentioned, Bob. What do you say to that when they'll say that these are First Nations, that sovereignty and reconciliation is it's not a blanket thing across the board, that they should have sovereignty and economic reconciliation in their nations, and they might not have room for these sort of land-based farms. So I guess what is your response to that? And they're saying that they should have the right to farm these, and the more major threat to the salmon is these more traditional industrial farming in the ocean. So you can who has comments on all that. It's a lot, sorry. But.
No, that's fine. I'd be remiss to say I didn't anticipate such a question. The Crown has obligations to accommodate Aboriginal rights that are protected by Section 35(1). When you mention economic reconciliation, this lies downstream from the accommodation of constitutionally protected rights. In British Columbia, we have a very small number of First Nations that support this industry. I would say 11, perhaps 12. And what we have is 130 First Nations that support the protection of wild salmon from open net pen fish farms. Later today, they'll talk about science that DFO has that says there's less than minimal harm and risk to wild salmon from open net pen fish farms. But I've done the work to examine the Canadian Science Advisory Secretariat, or CSAS, to be able to state without question that industry, the companies and their stakeholder groups and associations are at the table significantly influencing the beginning, middle, and end of that science risk assessments. And the Wild Salmon Alliance and First Nations across BC utterly reject that. It is offside in terms of conflict of interest, and it is contrary to a voluminous amount of science papers from true peer-reviewed science journals. And so we are looking out for the food security for First Nations across the province, and that we really advance to the government that they have obligations to the majority of First Nations on this topic.
And then just sort of on a, I guess, timing note, you said you haven't heard from the PMO since, I guess, August of last summer, and you're here on the Hill to meet with parliamentarians. Did you get some sort of signal? Because obviously you're both sides are here today. Did you get some sort of signal that you were concerned about? Is this to time it with the spring economic statement, or I'm just wondering if you got some worrying sign, or if it's just gone too long with the silence that you just can't take it anymore, sort of thing?
It's the last comment. The silence on this issue of where we are with the transition planning is not helping in terms of reconciliation and further building the meaningful working relationship that we've advanced. We've had no response from Prime Minister Carney to meet and discuss wild salmon, as it would meet the food security and culture and tradition needs of our people from across the province. The ISED has not released the What We Heard report from the last phase of the transition planning process, which wrapped up just prior to the federal election. DFO has also not begun the consultations on new regulations, conditions of license, and definition of closed containment. They had committed to begin that work in summer, fall of 2025. So as we watch 2029 approaching and understanding the nuances of the open net pen fish farm industry's operation, we need clarity now to ensure that we're not going to see a backtracking on the policy announcement of the ban. We've witnessed the struggles in British Columbia where the Crown has backtracked on DRIPA, and the unity of voice from First Nations delivered to the First Nation Leadership Council to advance via resolutions. We have those very same resolutions through the very same organizations, and it would set back the relationship for reconciliation with First Nations from across the province. And we're hoping that the government is going to put sufficient priority to the advancing of that relationship and not see it set back considerably by backtracking on the 2029 ban.
I just wanted to add that back in 2003, the Honourable John Fraser and a group of us were appointed by the BC government to do a study on the open pen farms, because the issue was arising then. And the issue was sea lice that the farms bring. And the other problem is the escapements of Atlantic salmon in BC water. Atlantic salmon in BC waters and rivers. That's an issue for us. The survival of the indigenous species must continue and should continue, regardless of economics and commercial. It's important for us. Part of our negotiations in Nisga'a Nation, our leadership managed to receive 18% of the sockeye stocks for our own use and for our commercial. But at the same time, we share the resource. That's not what we're saying that we're not going to share. As Chief Blaney was saying, that there is transition happening and partnership is there to be done.
This was already answered sort of in your previous answer, but I just wanted to check. I know this was supposed to happen actually originally in 2025, and it was delayed, and it was said, the minister at the time, I think Diane Laboutier, said in order to put in place a transition plan. Have you seen, that was about 2 years ago, you sort of answered it, but have you seen any signs that DFO is in fact doing anything to prepare for that transition over the past 2 years?
That's a perfect question. We've had nothing but radio silence from DFO since the federal election was called last spring. And we need to have clarity on where they're going in terms of the transition planning process. That the work that has been advanced from First Nations across the province in the transition planning process needs to be respected in the fulsome spectrum of Section 35(1) Aboriginal rights. I noted that Chief Marilyn Slett had her hand raised, so I'll turn to Marilyn.
Gayaxica, our nations understand the economic challenges that Canada is facing. We see it every day when we turn on the news, and we experience this in our communities, and that's why we're here. We also know that investments in the natural environment put people in place first, and it creates jobs, and it supports local economies, it fosters resiliency, and it builds Canada's natural security in times of economic uncertainty. And we're here together, united, and always continuing to push forward. It's perhaps time to reset the relationship and move forward in a good way, and that's why we're here. Focused on what we want to keep building on our coasts, and remaining hopeful that the federal government will be a willing partner in continuing to make this happen. We're nothing but resilient and resourceful and responsible in terms of wanting to work together. And that's the main, one of the main purposes on why we're here and continuing to push forward. Gayaxica,
Chief Slett. Any other questions?
Yeah, hi, I'm Maury Wolf from the Globe and Mail. The Spring Economic Update laid out 91 million over 5 years to support the whale population, including the southern resident killer whale population. It anticipated looking at increased noise from shipping as one of the issues. But I wondered if you felt that the health of the wild salmon population in BC should be part of that, given that uniquely among killer whale populations, the southern residents feed only on salmon and not seals. I wondered if you felt that that should be part of the equation, and more generally, do you have any concerns about increased shipping from major projects having an effect on wild salmon?
Your question really illuminates the dependency of all of the environment and animals, which Canadians and British Columbians see as iconic. whether it's a killer whale, whether it's an eagle, whether it's a wolf, whether it's a bear. People come from all around the world to witness the beauty of the animals that are found in British Columbia. And every one of them is dependent on healthy and abundant wild salmon. And it forms a very significant component of the economy of British Columbia for generations. And this is the focus that the Wild Salmon Alliance and First Nations from across British Columbia want to have a substantive discussion, not just with Prime Minister Carney, but a commitment to work together in partnership so we can establish an appropriate path that sees the wholesome respect shown to Pacific wild salmon for all British Columbians, the environment, the economy, First Nations, responding to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And when I extended the invite to Prime Minister Carney to come to one of our villages when we're working on fish, he could experience what it is that we're talking about, the strengthening of the family unit, of the community, of the nation, the healing, the joy that was targeted through the Indian Residential School. And these are substantive steps forward for the healing that Canada talks of. But we need to be able to have predictable access to salmon to exercise our culture and traditions. Cookby Willie Sellers spoke earlier about that there were years where his people were unable to fish. And those are years where the traditions and cultures were not able to be passed along. And these are fundamental to who we are as people. And in terms of shipping, there's a myriad of impacts and stressors to wild salmon. We must reach out and touch the ones we can for all the benefits that I've spoken of. Chief Blaine.
Comment on that. In my community, we have a grizzly bear viewing, and we do enhancement for our river in Butte Inlet, and that has also supported our bear viewing. And we have people coming from all over the world, from the U.S., England, Germany, all over the world that come to our bear tours, and it's an award-winning bear tours, but also we've started doing whale watching, mostly the gray whales. And I've taken part in some of the discussions on the southern resident killer whales. In Campbell River, they have a fishing pier there where they raise pinks in hatcheries, and then they imprint them by the pier. So people that are fishing, that come to fish in Campbell River off the pier, those pinks will come back and kind of go back and forth around the pier, and people will catch those pinks. When I was in that discussion with DFO about the southern resident killer whale, I asked them, we do that in Campbell River. Why can't we do that with the Chinook population for where the southern resident killer whales are? It'll provide the whales with some feed, but also the sports fishermen in the area down in Victoria area. And they didn't want to have the discussion. And I even brought up the issue of the impacts of the fish farms on the Chinooks. They didn't want to, they said, that's not part of this discussion, although the impacts on the fish farms, on the fry of the Chinook stocks when they're coming through Discovery Islands. You know, the issue with the sea lice is the toxins aren't effective anymore. The overuse of the toxins. I remember a slice used to be 99% effective, then it dropped down to 65% effective. Then they started mixing toxins, and then eventually they just sort of said, we'll just let them go for 42 days. And so they quit treating them for 42 days in between March and June. And in that time period, the sea lice population explodes up to over 1.2 billion. And I always looked at that as 1.2 billion bullets our fry have to swim through that. and their survival rate just drops way down from that. So I think the fish farms, get them out of the water, you remove the sea lice issue. You get them out of the water, you remove all the disease issues. And also, they're in a remote location. If you put them on land, they don't have to be in a remote location. You can make it a lot more accessible, more green, less carbon to get out to these remote places. And, you know, there's all the storms that happen in my community. They had a farm that was right in front of our community in Butte Inlet, and the tide was too strong. So the net started sinking with the anchors. And all that was left was the handrails with some netting on there, and that's what kept most of the salmon from escaping. So all these issues in the environment that impact those farms out in the open waters, it's not helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Blaney. I think your comments are very important that you've advanced to the federal government practical solutions and a pragmatic path to meet the needs of the wildlife in British Columbia. And there's no entertaining or substantive avenue for that discussion. And these are the internal barriers to government that must be overcome so First Nations can bring our holistic approach, a non-siloed approach to meeting the needs of our people, of the environment, of wildlife through healthy and abundant wild salmon. I want to turn to Cookbee Willie Sellers, Williams Lake First Nation.
Thank you, Bob. There's a responsibility that isn't falling just on a single nation in this conversation. We talk about the interior and the spawning tributaries that we have here that support the salmon runs, the salmon stock in the open ocean. It isn't just the open ocean communities and the communities in the interior to protect these salmon. It's also every single community that lives on the Fraser, that lives on the Chilcotin, that lives in these river systems that, you know, don't overfish, that are responsible. And what we're trying to do is just make sure that we have these salmon for future generations. The conversation has to happen across the board. And if we're only listening to 11 or 12 communities out of the 200 plus communities that make up British Columbia, that is not fair for all, and it is not best for all. And that is why we are so passionate and why we are pushing so hard, because there are alternatives to open pen fish farms. We've heard some of them today, and moving those onto the land and the investment that would warrant, the economic opportunity that would warrant, the offset of jobs that it would create. We need to seriously start looking at these, because I don't want to have my kids or my grandkids or my great grandkids not have the same opportunity that I had in learning how to process fish in the form of packaging them for the winter, drying them on the drying racks, or even smoking them and being able to celebrate them weekly throughout the winter months and remember those good times of when we gathered in a good way as a family and as a community. The responsibility, again, isn't just on us, it's on all of us.
Thank you.
Kirby.
That's all the time we have for this press conference. This concludes the press conference. Merci, c'est ce qui me fait à cette conférence de presse.
Thank you so much.